My name is Tanya Hitchman. I am the Director of Community Programs at ALS Texas. And while we all support the team in every way that we can, my primary focus is supporting caregivers of all ages. So that's husbands, wives, sons, daughters, nieces, nephews. And in the last 2 years, we have really built some robust education, programming, and support for young caregivers. That's young caregivers, we say, is 30 and under. And we know for a fact, well, probably more than 3,000 young caregivers in the state of Texas. That's a lot, y'all. That is a lot of young caregivers. We also know that caregivers as young as 5 years of age have told me how they help provide nutrition to a loved one through a feeding tube. And so they're involved in the hands-on skills training. So we have really spent the last 2 years, again, with that education, programming, and support in hands-on skills training and self-care for caregivers, mental health awareness, and compassion fatigue and caregiver burnout. All of those things are part of what we have been focusing on in our community, in addition to providing support for those living with ALS. This is National Family Caregivers Month, so while we hope and focus on supporting caregivers year-round, November gives us an opportunity to really honor and support caregivers. So this is actually the third of our special events for this month. We've had an event that has been focused on veterans and veteran caregivers and the dynamics involved in that and extra support for veterans. And we've also had trauma-informed yoga last week to, again, help address the trauma that comes with an ALS diagnosis for everyone in the family. And tonight, we are so honored to have a broadcast journalist, podcast host, Sarah Trott with us. You all probably recognize her beautiful face and have seen her and heard her podcast. What you may or may not know is that Sarah has a deep connection to the ALS community. About 6 years ago, her dad was diagnosed with ALS. And in October, she shared with the world and those of us that had been following her journey that her dad hung up his jersey after just a heroic battle and won his wings, is what we say to Sarah. So thank you for taking time out to join our ALS Texas community at this time. And we just appreciate seeing you and having you here tonight.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here and see everybody here. Just thank you so much for that introduction. And anybody that has been affected by ALS is close to my heart. And it's an unfortunate club that we're all in, that we're all here because we're somehow touched by ALS. But it's something that I know really well. The last 6 years, my dad was diagnosed when I was in college, and our family had been battling the disease with him for 6 years. And in October, on October 15th, he passed away. He was on hospice for 2 years, and he was an incredible fighter throughout the entire journey and very optimistic and positive, and believed his purpose in life was to be an inspiration to others, and that it was his calling from God to be as resilient and positive and heroic as he could be. And so he is absolutely my hero. And it's just a privilege to share his journey and my family's experience with all of you guys. And especially after having the experience of being on The Bachelor and raising awareness about ALS. It's unfortunately a lot of people don't know about ALS. Once you're kind of in this club of knowing somebody, a loved one who has had, or you know of somebody who's had ALS, you quickly realize it's more common than we think. And so fortunately, the Ice Bucket Challenge, brought a lot of awareness to the disease, but there's still a lot of progress to be made, and also a unique demographic to be served. When I first started this journey, I was 19 years old. I was in college, and I did the whole frantic Google search right when we got the news. After about a year or so of, going to the doctors and my dad trying to figure out, what's going on? I don't feel right. Is this a knee injury? Is this early onset Alzheimer's? Is it Parkinson's? Going through that kind of laundry list of different things that this could be, and all of the emotions that come with it. We realized it was ALS. And so I didn't know much about it. I Googled what is it, and I kind of went into a black hole of absorbing information about what is ALS. And something that I found during that journey as being a young person, about to start the decade of my 20s, that a lot of people my age couldn't really relate to the situation I was in. Maybe they had a parent or a grandparent experience an illness and pass away, but not so much a direct parent. So I felt really alone. And looking back 6 years later, there's so many things that I wish I could have done differently and things that I wish I knew. And so part of my mission now, after having that incredible exposure on The Bachelor and now using my social media platforms to talk about ALS and to unite young caregivers, that's part of my mission. And I have a caregiver community Facebook page. We have, I think, 900 or more active members on that group. Weekly, I lead virtual Zoom small groups to about 15 young women who are also dealing with a parent or a loved one with ALS. And I'm looking to create next year virtual, unfortunately, with COVID. Next year will have to be virtual again, a virtual retreat for caregivers, so people can kind of have a little bit of a sense of empowerment and connection with other young caregivers. But ultimately, the goal, once COVID is a thing of the past, hopefully, we can have in-person retreats where caregivers can be sponsored to come to a big city near them and meet with other young caregivers who are in similar situations, hear from guest speakers, guest experts, have some wellness, some yoga, happy hours, and just much needed retreat for the caregivers who play such a big role in the battle of ALS. So that's a little bit of a background on me, and happy to answer any questions before I talk your ear off even more.
No, I love that. And I saw that Meg made a comment in the chat box that there's 907, I think, in Sarah's caregiving community. And that reminded me, thank you, Meg, that please use the chat box. Feel free to put a question in there if you have a question for Sarah or about ALS or ALS Texas. We want to, again, get those answered. And we'll definitely have some time along the way as those pop up. And as we finish, again, this is kind of a table conversation where you can ask any questions that you've got. And Sarah, I love all that you shared. There were so many things I was trying to think of. I want to go back to this. You mentioned purpose, and we will come back to that for sure. You also talked about the time leading to diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And is it this, and I have heard families say we were praying that it would be cancer over ALS. And so that tells us we know that ALS is a terminal diagnosis. We know that. And for young people, especially, you said you were 19. Mm-hmm. It comes at a time where you are maybe graduating high school, if it's your junior or senior year of high school, or perhaps you're already in college. The future is full of opportunities, but when a family is dealing with an ALS diagnosis, those opportunities have to be reevaluated and the future is reevaluated. How did things change for you as far as your future and the emotions that were involved in those decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I remember feeling at a crossroads. I was in school at the University of Missouri at the time, which is very far from San Diego. You can't just hop in the car and get home, in a day if you had to. I mean, maybe if you drove overnight, but it wouldn't make sense. So I was in school pretty far away from home, and I remember feeling really isolated and not sure if I should drop out or take a semester off or come home. And I remember having those conversations because with ALS, you're not quite sure what the timeline would be. And yes, it is fatal, with something like cancer. There's, the hope of maybe, chemo or, a longer life expectancy. And so I remember just feeling crushed by that news. So life changed in the sense of having all of these difficult questions arise. And I wasn't sure if I should come home, but I talked with my family and they wanted me to continue my education and kind of do a wait and see and monitor my dad's progression of the illness and make decisions as things with his care changed. And so unfortunately, he battled the disease and it was a slower progression in the beginning. It wasn't as abrupt as it can be in some cases. And so I remember after graduating, I wanted to find a job that was close to home. And so the career path I chose was broadcast journalism, TV reporting and anchoring. And right when you get out of college, usually you're starting in a small market, kind of middle of nowhere, small town. And so I just made it my absolute goal to work as hard as I possibly could to be placed in a TV market in California close to home, which is not an easy thing to do because there aren't many small markets in California near San Diego. There's Los Angeles, which is the #2 TV market, and nobody out of college really gets their start there. And so I started in Palm Springs, California, which is about 2 hours away. It's in the Coachella Valley from San Diego. And so my dad was still pretty stable. I was coming home, taking flights home to see him as much as I could, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and made that career move to be closer to home. And I worked at that TV station, driving 2 hours, 2.5 hours every weekend each way to come home to San Diego to see him, to help my mom. And again, they were insistent that I pursue my job and pursue a career. And it got to a point when my dad went on hospice in 2019 that it just got to be too much for me to continue my job. And that was terrifying to take a leave, not only because I wasn't sure what the future would hold with my career, taking a pause, but looking back, that was the best decision I could have ever made, was to take this temporary pause away from a career, away from these things that are happening, and to be with my family, because that's truly time that you never get back. And so my advice to other young people would be to try to find ways to preserve your identity and your passions, but also if you're close to your family like I am, to make that sacrifice, because it's a decision that you will never regret. Time is the only thing that you can't get back. So.
Yeah, so wow, it definitely, it changed the course of what you originally had planned. And we hear from a lot of our young caregivers that same thing. I have a college opportunity. Do I go? Do I stay? And there's that battle of the emotions. And I'd like to share a quote. It was about last year at this time, I interviewed one of our local caregivers, Gabriel Poveda, who is now a senior at the University of Texas. And he shared a quote that to me was very profound, and I feel, and I have it on here because I want to honor his words and what he said. It's so powerful for young caregivers. And he was sharing his experience, and he said, "You're going to be a remarkably strong individual. For young caregivers, I really wish I could tell you that there's some sort of personal something that makes it a little bit worth it, this experience. But what that is very little. The truth is, it's going to be hard. Very, very hard. The only personal solace that I can genuinely give you is that you're going to be remarkably able to connect with other human beings. You emerge with a sense of pain that makes us more empathetic and makes us feel closer to people. Alongside your peers, you're going to find that you enjoy much more than them. It's going to be bittersweet, but you're going to enjoy walking, talking, and eating more than they ever are. You're going to enjoy having a family and having people you love more than they ever will. And when people are suffering, you're going to be able to help them more than anyone else will. That is monumental, and I know that has to be part of your experience as well, as far as a life-changing experience and how it's changed you.
Yeah, that is incredible. Those words are so true. And I feel the same way. The person I am today is completely different than who I was 6 years ago. This is, of course, a transformative time for anybody, going through their early 20s, but to experience something as difficult and painful as ALS as a young person, I truly believe my life perspective and worldview has shifted to be more empathetic. And especially, in my family, I didn't really have a close relative or somebody with a disability. And since having ALS and being so alongside my dad, you're more in tune with, some of those awkward stares or mean comments or people who are impatient. And, I don't think I was any of those things before my dad's diagnosis, but now I'm just even more cautious and careful about, people who are not as able-bodied, and to just be patient and empathetic with people who are struggling. And when you ask somebody, how are you doing, to really mean it, not just, how are you doing? Good, okay, moving on, but to stop and slow down and to really appreciate time. And something with my family too, over the past couple of years, making every holiday, every birthday a big celebration, and getting every last drop out of life that you possibly can, every hug, squeezing extra tight, because it's true, you have a greater sense of appreciation for time and family when you have something like ALS in your life.
Definitely. We have a couple of comments or questions here. Gary wanted to know, and you kind of touched on this, but what are your 3 best pieces of advice for new caregivers?
That's amazing. I think number 1 would be to create a sense of community. When I first heard of this diagnosis, I felt kind of isolated, and I didn't really reach out or try to cultivate community. I just assumed that nobody else could relate to me, and this was something I had to figure out on my own. But really, there actually are a lot of resources out there if you try to get the courage and the initiative to look for them, whether that's your local ALS chapter or joining a support group or a small group. I think that's the best thing, is to lean on your community, your friends. Ask them to go for a walk with you. It doesn't have to be to support a caregiver or family. It doesn't always have to be financial. It could just be, with your time and, hanging out with people. Another piece of advice would be to seek therapy. I was kind of standoffish about that, and there's kind of a stigma around therapy, but it has transformed me personally, and it's not for everyone, but I think talking to somebody who isn't in your bubble, who isn't in your direct circle, who is kind of a third party bystander who can support you emotionally will be really important, because all of the feelings associated with caregiving and ALS are really intense. And at a certain point, there's family and friend fatigue when they hear about what's going on in your life, and so to have that third party is really helpful. And then I guess 3 pieces of advice. Another one would be self-care, and kind of what I touched on earlier, preserving parts of your identity, things that you're really passionate about, and hobbies. I think as caregivers, it's really easy to delve into the world of care and forget about yourself sometimes. And in order to be a successful caregiver, you can't pour from an empty cup. So fill up your cup and do what makes you happy. Go bake cookies with a friend, continue that hobby, painting, music, whatever it may be, exercise, running a 10K, anything that as a caregiver that you did prior to caregiving that made you happy, if you could try to continue to do something like that so you don't lose sight of your identity in the process, I think is really important as well.
That is fabulous advice. I think those are nuggets, and I don't even think we can call them nuggets because they're so huge to the caregiving journey that if you can be mindful of those early on, I think it's critical. You mentioned your gifts and, doing what you love. Here at ALS Texas, we do a Stress Less on Purpose workshop. It's how we can recognize our body is reacting to stress and, travel that stress cycle and deal with the feelings, and also stay focused on purpose. That's for those living with ALS and for caregivers. What do you love regardless of your circumstance? What brings you joy, and how can you incorporate that into a day? And you shared that how your dad traveled this journey was his mission and his purpose, and to do it with dignity and with honor, and to bring awareness. And it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes by Dr. Viktor Frankl. And he said that the one thing you can't take away from me is how I choose to respond to what you do to me. The last of one's freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance. And I love that. He actually shared that in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. And through his experience in being in a concentration camp, actually 4 of them. So I think this is so powerful for the ALS experience, is we can choose how to respond. And you've already touched on that, on some real key choices that you made in your response.
Yeah, thank you. I think that quote is so powerful. One of my dad's favorite quotes was, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. Or, he had so many quotes. One of his favorite quotes, good thing I love a challenge. We put that on wristbands after he passed. But his mental strength, I think, kept his physical strength sustained. His mental strength was really incredible. And he was truly an inspiration to our community. Because with his eye gaze, he was still cracking jokes, and he was inviting our friends over up until COVID, and even during COVID, socially distanced in the backyard, having friends over. And even when he could no longer play on his, men's softball league, or, he couldn't, drink a beer with his friends in the backyard, he still had his friends over, and we would barbecue and try to keep things as close to normal as possible. And that kept him going to have friends around him and to be mentally strong. And I think that also helped, his resiliency helped it be easier for me and my mom and some of his care aides to care for him, because he was accepting, and we're also a family of faith, and that there's something greater than this world to look forward to, and that, he truly believed this was his calling in life. So.
Yeah, you said acceptance. That's a big one. That's a big word for, obviously, for the individual who's living with ALS to have acceptance, and for the entire family. And not everybody gets to that point of acceptance at the same time. Would you agree? In a family, too.
Yeah. I would say in many ways, the beginning of the ALS battle was even harder than, in some ways, the last 2 years, because the first 2 years, you're like ripping your hair out in frustration, and you can't believe that this is happening. And, it's so hard and painful to come to terms with the diagnosis, and to watch your loved one slowly be unable to do all the things that they were able to do. And it's heart-wrenching. And I'm sure all of us here in this Zoom call have experienced that pain. And I just am holding space for everybody here that has been through that personally for themselves or for their loved ones. And it's very, very hard to accept this because horrible things happen to good people and there's no reasoning for it. You know, it doesn't make any sense. But to be strong and to cherish the moments, and that there is a greater purpose, that your actions do matter. And even though that this isn't what many of us intended for our loved ones, that there's a greater purpose to it all, to hopefully inspire others, and to, for my family, to really cherish and soak in all of those family moments. I was very close to my family before, but we got even closer through this diagnosis. And my dad would always say, you know, I could have had a heart attack and died, or I could have been hit by a car and died in a car accident in an instant. At least with ALS, we've had the time to express that we love each other and to fly home for Thanksgiving and Christmas, maybe when we wouldn't have, or maybe not celebrate that occasion together, that you actually are coming together and watching family videos, playing board games, and really spending this quality time together. I think we packed in the 6 years that my dad had ALS more than what a family may do in a lifetime. And so that helped our family get through it and really cherish the time. Yeah.
What would you say is your purpose now?
I would say it's to advocate for ALS, people who have ALS, and young caregivers, and to raise awareness, because not enough people know about ALS and there needs to be a cure. And it's so frustrating to see so many people impacted by this terrible disease, and there has to be a cure out there, hopefully within our lifetime or soon after that. But advocating for ALS research, and also connecting young caregivers, empowering young women, and just letting young people who are going through hardships like this, whether it's caregiving for someone with ALS or Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, stroke, there's so many challenges that a lot of young people deal with. And I think leaning on each other, we're all stronger together.
Absolutely. We're better and stronger together. Can you share more, and maybe it's in the chat or even just sharing it in discussion, on how everyone who's watching tonight and those that will watch later can connect with the caregiving community, and where they can look for information on the virtual retreats and hopefully in person soon?
Yeah, absolutely. So the name of my Facebook group is Sarah's Caregiver Community, and you can join there and meet people from all over the US who are caregivers. And you can find me on Instagram at the Sarah Trott. And also, if you go on the Facebook page, you can sign up for virtual small groups. It's mostly, you know, young women in their 20s, early 30s, who are the children of a parent who has ALS. So if any of you guys or, you know, your kids want to join, it's a great community. We have a WhatsApp group chat, and we're texting in it every single day. And I've been doing that for about 6 to 8 weeks now. And unfortunately, in the time that we started that group, I lost my dad to ALS, and 2 other women in that group have lost their parents to ALS, but we're sending each other flowers and notes of encouragement, because nobody understands ALS more than somebody else who has been through it. So I'm here to help, and please feel free to reach out or email me. And Tanya, please share my contact information with everybody here too.
Absolutely. We will definitely do that. Like I said, we're better and stronger together. It takes a village. It takes a big village to travel the ALS journey. I mentioned at the beginning that ALS Texas has implemented in the last 2 years a lot of programming and support for caregivers of all ages. I wanted to also share, I believe that you need a big life toolbox, and put as many tools in there as you possibly can. You may not ever need, you know, most or some of the tools, but when you do need it, we want you to be able to grab that. And so we have additional tools as well through our programming and support for caregivers of all ages. So I've got this slide up here. And again, we are recording this presentation today, so you'll get this recording and you can go back and look at this, and you can always reach out to me or anybody on our team. But we have peer support groups for young adults under 30, high school and college, that meets once a month. And we also have a peer support group for 8 to 13-year-olds to connect and talk about their journey too. Those again meet monthly. In fact, they meet this week. Wednesday night is the 8 to 13-year-olds. Thursday is the young adults. That actually helped start by a youth leadership council that we have, Sarah, that's made up of individuals very similar to you, that this experience has changed them forever and they want to make a difference on purpose. And they said, how can we help? What can we do? 2 of them help lead these groups because they understand the experience and they keep in touch outside of the groups. They don't talk just about ALS, y'all. I want you to know that. Probably in Sarah's small groups, you can't talk about ALS all the time. These young adults and these kids, well, the young adults talk about dating and applying for college and exams and you name it. And then the young kids, they talk about sometimes how to build a gaming PC, which I learn a lot on those calls. But they can talk, you never know where it's going to go, but they also talk about how ALS makes them feel, and they share that common bond. And we also have our Family Talks series, which is really focused on empowering families to talk about ALS, to have those conversations, to make memories, to plan, and to really spend time together, and to make sure that they're supporting each other. And so we want you to know that we have those resources. In 2022, we are working with Dr. Melinda Kavanaugh, and we will have a Y-Care training, which is specific hands-on training for young caregivers by clinicians, helping them to understand this is a wheelchair, this is a feeding tube, and to really get comfortable with those things and to connect. It's all about connecting, right? That's what we're doing tonight. I hope that by looking on this screen, and as we spend some more time talking to each other, that you all see you're not alone. If some of you on here, I know I've seen at clinic or I've seen at other events, you've heard me say, do not get on isolation island, right? It's really hard to get off that island, and you do not want to isolate yourself throughout this experience. Sarah shared that connecting with community, learning and educating yourself is key. And that's what we all want to do together.
Yeah.
Let me see. Somebody else had a question here. Y'all feel free to write any comments. We do have the link to the Sarah's Facebook community page. And when we send the recorded link for you this week, we'll include information in the chat, including the links where you can have access to all those resources for your life toolbox. And feel free, if you want to put anything in the chat or unmute your microphone, if you're feeling bold tonight and actually want to ask a question, this is the time. And Sarah, while we're waiting for someone to have a question or put something in the chat box, we have some photos that you shared with us. Are you okay if we share those in this group?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right. I think they're beautiful, and I definitely want to celebrate your dad's life.
Oh. Yeah, so I can give some context. This is the engagement of my sister. So they're actually, this is my sister next to me, Lauren. She's 4 years older. She's 29, I'm 25. This is Andy, her fiance, my dad there, Tom, and my mom, Janice. They celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary September 30th, and my dad passed October 15th. So they had one last anniversary together, and he gave her, with the help of me and my sister, we went to the jewelry store, a little necklace with 2 hearts that are kind of like an infinity sign. So hearts bound together forever, which was really special. And this was the engagement in our backyard in San Diego. we wanted my dad to be a part of the engagement just because we weren't sure if he would be able to, make it one day to the wedding. So Andy was asking me for help, like, how should I propose? What should I do? And I'm like, why not right here in the backyard? So my sister was totally surprised, and we were all watching through a window, and he brought her around the backyard on Christmas Day a year ago, got on one knee, and then we all jumped out and had champagne to celebrate with his family and my family.
I love that. Beautiful scenery for sure, but such a beautiful family.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, this is at the ALS walk in San Diego, probably a few years ago, like 2019, 2018, maybe.
We just finished our walk to defeat ALS October 30th.
Oh, nice. Was it virtual or in person? Or yeah.
We did a combination this year. We were so happy to be able to bring back in person on some levels. So we had 3 in person in the state this year.
Nice. Yeah. And this is another one. Our last name is Trott, so we made team t-shirts that said hot to trot. Yeah, my dad had a great sense of humor and big Boston Red Sox fan, so the colors on the t-shirt are Boston Red Sox. Yeah, and this is, I believe, at his birthday party a few years back, probably 2018 there, I would say, in 2018.
And we have another Red Sox fan on here too, by the way. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I just saw it. Go Red Sox. Kind of bummed how the season turned out this year, but there's always next year.
We had another question here too, Sarah, and the question is, do you plan to get involved in ALS advocacy initiatives, communicating with elected officials? Any plans for that?
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind the past couple years, but that's definitely something I want to get on my radar. And I believe the FDA just approved a new drug, I believe. Oh, a small one. Somebody was about to say something. Oh, you're muted, Marshall. But I'm not sure if you wanted to say something, but yeah, I do need to get more into that and delve into those advocacy things. That's a big component of finding a cure, right? So.
Absolutely. Marshall, did you want to say anything? No? Not to put you on the spot. There is a lot going on. Oh, he said his microphone is broken. Okay. There is a lot going on, Sarah, right now. Today, we actually had a clinic panel with 2 of our neurologists in the state, Dr. Appel in Houston at Houston Methodist. And he was one of the 2 that we had, and Dr. Tremonti. And so they really talked a lot about that. And Marshall said, yeah, Amylyx is close to being FDA approved to slow the progression of ALS. And they talked about how excited they were. And I know even, again, here in Texas, Dr. Heitzman in Dallas, when he's been asked about, how do you feel about the future for, slowing the progression, a cure? He said, I'm excited. He goes, there's so much happening right now, more than ever before. And there's so many incredibly intelligent people working on that.
That's right. The application was submitted to the FDA. Okay. That is exciting. And I just hope it can get approved and help people, but because it's a long journey to get it to that point for sure.
Yeah, it takes a lot, and that's where that advocacy comes in. So that was a really good question.
This is Barry Gatlin. I was wondering, you said that your father went into hospice 2 years ago. What was the decision point for him to to go into hospice?
Yeah, I believe he was losing weight and he was on the feeding tube at that point. So we switched to going to the feeding tube before he was too weak to do so. It was a variety of factors, you know, and I can't remember if there was a certain incident, a pinpoint of what changed. But, you know, hospice is all about keeping you comfortable. And unfortunately with ALS, you know, it is a steady decline. So I think, yeah, with being on hospice, it was just to keep him comfortable and to manage his pain. But that is a really good question. And it was 2 years ago, and I'm trying to remember what exactly was the turning point. Just also more difficulties with his mobility and pain management as well. I think that was also a big factor. He was having more, he was wheelchair bound at that point, of course, and it was much more difficult for him to get in and out of bed and dealing with a lot of that pain that he was having being in the wheelchair. So.
And Barry, that's a really good question. We have videos on our website too of recorded events we've done in the past, where that's a question that comes up often in the ALS journey. And I'll just kind of throw in there too, because it was brought up that hospice is an approach to caregiving. It's not a place necessarily. I know a lot of people think that hospice is only end of life is near and imminent in days or weeks and it's going somewhere, but hospice can be in home and it can be for years. I just want you to be aware of that too. And great question to do some more research on and to visit our site because we have some information on that as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. It is definitely an approach to his care. You know, at that point, it wasn't imminent or anything like that. It was more just, you know, this is the next step to manage his pain, to manage his care. And he was in home until he passed. He didn't leave or go anywhere. We had hospice nurses that were coming weekly meetings with, you know, him and my mom, my dad, and me and my sister about his care and pain management.
Thank you, Sarah. That's the stuff that's hard to talk about too, in the experiences, making some of those tough decisions.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments in the chat box, or feel free to unmute your microphone if you'd like. Again, we are recording this and we will send it out to someone says, what do they do for pain management? It really just depends. That's what you talk with the hospice nurse, your team. It's a hospice team. Mm-hmm. And so if you are joining us tonight from the ALS Texas community, you can connect with your care services manager in the state. We have team members throughout the state. And if you're not sure who that person is, maybe you haven't connected with them yet, you can reach out to me and I'll make sure to get you connected to them. If you're joining us from another state, each chapter has care services team members that can help explain the different aspects of the journey to you and maybe give you some referrals for hospice in your community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for all of the messages. I'm reading them here. It's been such a pleasure to connect with you guys.
Well, we greatly appreciate it. We always, again, we want to focus on young caregivers. Not only is it a different journey, but you are the future, and in your advocacy and leadership in helping to create a world without ALS, it's going to come from you. It's going to come from the young caregivers. And so, yeah, I love all the comments in there. Yes. And we've got somebody here from New Jersey, New York too. So again, reach out to your local chapter. And if your local chapter does not have young adult or peer support groups, you can join the Texas chapter. We want to support young caregivers everywhere who don't have a place to talk. And now you've got others with Sarah's caregiver community. And again, you've got that big toolbox. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Sarah, especially for you for taking time out and sharing your journey, your insight and community with our community. And we will send this recording out to each of you. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us anytime. And if you've got questions for Sarah, we'll make sure you've got her contact information as well.
Thank you so much, you guys.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Good night.